Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Paul Harm, the Director of Jazz Studies, and the director of this ensemble. This is the UNL Jazz Orchestra. On behalf of our students, faculty, and staff, we're really honored to be here to play for you today in these very unique circumstances. I was asked a few months ago when I was told about this wonderful festival that's going on and celebration, is there any way that we might be able to involve the jazz area? And I said, well, what's the event? And he and my colleague, Mark Clinton, told me about this. I said, boy, the winds of fate have obviously brought us together. Because as you're well aware, the state of Nebraska has a wonderful Czech tradition. And in the world of music, well, the state of Nebraska, Czech music, the name, as I was taught to pronounce it, is Yannick, is synonymous with that. But we call him Yannick. You know, doesn't sound good now. I'm going to start calling you Yannick. Yeah. It's so much nicer. And I was very fortunate a number of years ago to have Andrew Yannick, if I may, come to the University of Nebraska as an undergraduate, got his music education degree, went on to do his master's in composition at the wonderful DePaul Music School in Chicago. And I'm going to have him talk about this process and what we're doing. But as it turns out, Andrew's compositions and his focus was bringing his Czech heritage to the jazz idiom. So what you're going to hear, we'll let him talk about it. Before we do, because we understand that this is being webcast and he might get a chance to see it, we want to extend our condolences to our, I'm not going to be in the role of director, I'm going to be in the role of sight reader and lead alto player. Simon Bessemer, our lead alto player, sadly lost his grandmother and is with his family, and our condolences go out to him. But we hope you enjoyed it, and now we're going to turn it over to Andrew Yannick.
Hello. Yeah, thank you everyone for coming out. As Dr. Har said, it's really, it was a great turn of fate that this all worked out because back in 2014, my final project for my master's degree in jazz composition at DePaul was put together a set of Czech folk and popular songs that I then recomposed for a modern jazz big band. I put on that performance in Chicago. They've been played a few times since, but this will be only the second time we've played all four of them all together. That process for me was taking music that I have heard since I was born and trying to find ways to keep the essence of it so that if someone who knew the tune, they'd still be able to recognize it, but then it could also stand alone as a jazz composition, that if someone had no idea what this tune was, they would still enjoy it and think it worked. The first tune we're going to do is called Písnička Česká by Karl Hassler, and it's going to feature myself on tenor and Malachi Million on the guitar. The next tune in the set, it's called Rostislav Suka. It is originally composed by Jaromir Vejvoda, who is most famous as the composer of the Beer Barrel Polka, which at one time was the most popular song in the world. It's still played to this day. The original Czech lyrics were not about beer, but when it came to America, it became about beer, so that's not surprising, I suppose. But he also wrote a number of other wonderful songs, and this is my setting of Rostislav Suka. The next song in the set that we're going to do here is entitled Morava Krasna Zim. It is a traditional tune. There's no composer for this. It's a folk song about the Moravian section of the country. Originally, I've heard this done with Czech brass bands, kind of as an up-tempo tune and triple meter. But for some reason, because I just heard the melody, I thought it was really beautiful that it could be translated into a much slower ballad. So this is going to be kind of a ballad inspired by the writing of Maria Schneider, who I was thinking of when I did this. But I hope you enjoy Morava Krasna Zim. The final tune of our set here is a song by the composer Blahoslav Smizovsky entitled Felezna Friarko. And I first heard this once again in a Czech brass band, and it was a very energetic up-tempo arrangement, so I thought it would lend itself well to kind of an up-tempo contemporary swing treatment of the tune. One thing I did with a lot of these songs is mess around with the different parts of the form, so a lot of them would be similar to a march where they had a main strain and then a trio is the second part. And with this one, I like to put them out of order and put the different sections at different points throughout sprinkled so it doesn't follow the original form, but it's something that people who know the tune can kind of latch onto, almost like a little bit of a musical joke. So this is Felezna Friarko, and we're going to hear from Paul Haar on the alto, Malachi Million on the guitar, and Andrew Ray on the drums.
How about a hand for the UNL Jazz Orchestra? And Andrew Yannick.
So first, let me tell you, we both sitting there and commenting good things. My name is Tony Ackerman. I'm an American guitarist, and I've lived in the Czech Republic and played with my Czech partner here for 35 years. And first, I just want to give you my greatest praise. First to Andrew, because Andrew, you wrote 4 pieces, each one of them so varied. You used varied rhythmic styles. I mean, I was satisfied that my personal favorite was the third, the ballad, because of the wonderful harmony, because of your solo, which kind of took that harmony and took it somewhere totally else. I was really amazed by your playing in that one. So beautiful writing, varied. The band is perfect. I mean, if luckily we don't have to work with you in terms of making you a better band, because there's no way to do it. Paul, one of the things that I was really impressed. I'm just kind of talking my impressions. That I was really impressed by the velvet sound of both the brass and the trumpets back there didn't bother me at all. Sometimes trumpets bother me. It didn't. You really, I mean, people. I don't know how many what you know here about big band music, but it's hard to master like this. It's hard to get big band music to sound not forced. It's hard to have this big band has this like difficult. You have to walk a fine line between total discipline and freedom. Right, because when you're back there playing the punch lines or the backgrounds, you have to be very disciplined, and you don't get to express yourself very much. Sometimes the only people who can really express themselves are the soloists. And yet you guys found a really beautiful balance. So. Great time playing as a drummer. This last one just sailed right through. Bass player, beautiful. I love your tone. So I just have good things to say. And guitar player, I'm jealous of your cleanliness and your dominance of jazz scale. So it's really great. Can we give them one more round of applause, everybody? So, beautiful. So you deserve it. Thank you.
Well, I don't have much to add to this beautiful, what Tony said. I'm a Berklee College of Music alumni, so I mean, I know what you play about, and I know the canon and the standards and everything. But what amazed me is the way Mr. Yannick, changed this kind of more heavy harmonies into the maiden voyage type of modal music, modal playing, which I couldn't imagine that could be done, in the way. Although, as I studied, when I was at Berklee in 1976, there was a Polish guy who came in from Zakopane, from the, I don't know what he was doing at Berklee, because Berklee is a jazz school, and he was into folk music. And I realized after hours of talking to him that what he wanted to prove is that there is something, the link between the folk music of Poland and Moravia and jazz playing is Lydian tune, Lydian scale. And here we see how beautifully it works so beautifully, because this is the actual bridge in between those two words, who otherwise have nothing to do at all. I mean, the tradition is going somewhere else. And he has written some thesis on this, and I didn't follow it anymore, but this is how it works in the real life, So thank you very much. It was beautiful. I wish I could play it that well.
So I want to have a discussion with you. I want you to talk a little bit too, because and anybody who wants can take the microphone, go. But okay, following some free thoughts I had as I started to hear you. Now, Martin and I are going to play tomorrow night our kind of music, which is also under the category of jazz. But there could not be two more different sounding musics. I can't imagine. I mean, I hope some of you will come tomorrow, and if you do, you'll see. There's a world of difference between them. So what is it about jazz that's able to accommodate so many different styles and personalities? Jazz grew up as a hybrid of different musics, right? In New Orleans, it was European music and African music, slave songs. So what is it about jazz, do you find, Andra? Let me ask you, why is jazz such a welcoming medium?
Well, I think it goes along exactly with what you were talking about, is that the roots of it are people say fusion jazz is kind of be a bad word, like you think of jazz rock, but jazz itself has always been a fusion of different styles. And so when I was taking on this project, part of it was I wanted to see just how far removed from the original style of these tunes I could go and still have the tune there. Yeah. And I just feel that even though jazz is still, in the grand scope of music history, fairly young, there's been pretty revolutionary changes over that short amount of time. And as a jazz composer, that kind of offers you like limitless possibilities with how you can set things. So when I first gave this as a recital for my master's, one element I had was I played about a minute clip of brass bands playing the original songs, and then we would play this. And it was kind of funny just to see the look on people's faces after just a few bars of starting these new tunes. And then selfishly for me, it's kind of fun because most of my family members know all these songs. So it's almost an inside joke. So like my uncle's like, wow, I've never heard trumpets play that melody so high, or wow, that was the second half of that tune, but that's not how we play it. But it's still there, and I think that spirit of fusing things together and just trying to do something new with pre-existing material, it's just something that's always been a part of jazz, and that's what I was trying to capture in this project.
Thanks. This conference is about 1968. And so much was happening in jazz. So much is happening every decade, as far as I know. I haven't followed the last, but in 1968, let me just ask you, maybe somebody else in the group, like, what do you know about jazz of the 1960s? Who have you listened to? Anybody want to answer? This isn't a quiz. I really want to know. I want to know who you listened to.
I'll start it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I was really, of that era, I'm really into the Miles Davis Second Quintet, mid 60s, and then right up to 68 was about the end of their acoustic quintet, and then he started going towards more his electric music with Bitches Brew and In a Silent Way. So it's kind of the fusing of his old quintet and adding Chick Corea on keyboards and things like that. But that was a big influence on me from that time.
I saw them in 1968, and I saw it with both Chick Corea and Keith Jarrett playing together with Miles Davis. But go ahead, because this is the point, late 1960s, where Martin, who started the first jazz rock group behind the Iron Curtain, took the world of Eastern European music somewhere else. So Martin, go ahead.
Well, I just want to skip backwards a little bit. I just want to say that the influence or the kind of the beautiful themes of Polish, Slovak, Moravian tradition, which we have heard here, were also influenced, or more people were influenced by it. One of them is Jan Hammer and Miroslav Witosz and his brother, who made the junior trio back in the 60s. Actually I shot a film on Miroslav Witosz recently, so I went through the archive. So and that was beautiful, influencing. And they took it more traditionally. You already do much more with the themes. They stuck to the basic harmonies and the form and everything. And they were not the only ones, but there was Keith Jarrett was mentioned here, and Jan Garbarek, did it enormously, and obviously all the bands from Poland, and from the Czech country. It's just obvious, but I mean, you do it different way and very revolutionary way.
Andrew, you used the word revolutionary, and in the 1960s, so much revolutionary was happening in jazz. And when you just said 1968 was when Miles Davis turned from, he was so inspired. And if people here might or might not know jazz history of the 60s, but up until this wonderful, innovative Miles Davis, jazz was a very complex and sometimes it got very rarefied, and Miles Davis was influenced by rock music, which was really happening in the late 1960s. And the albums that you mentioned, Bitches Brew and A Silent Way, they were key for both of us. So I never thought of it until you mentioned it. 1968, we have so much happening in the culture of this country, so much in the music, and there goes Miles Davis bringing back jazz. When I first met Martin, he said he loved how Miles Davis brought jazz back to the lifeblood, this underneath current, the lifeblood of the people. Do you guys ever listen to those Miles Davis albums of the late 60s, of Bitches Brew and In a Silent Way? So, yeah.
Could I actually ask a question for Martin?
Please.
You mentioned that 1968 was when you were starting to form your own band, like the first Czech band under the Iron Curtain. How did you go about listening to jazz and forming jazz groups in the Czech Republic during that time?
Well, the very beginning, I mean, we started a bit earlier in '65. I established the group, and we were into sort of free jazz, for the first 2 or 3 years. And then we went back to this kind of charo, which Miles Davis brought about. And we were so lucky. Well, first of all, there was not many albums available in the country, but there is a lot of radio stations all around. So that was the source of the basic, information. But we were, at the beginning, we were sort of lucky. That was the time Edda was talking about, sort of a little bit warming up around the 65, 66, 67, 68. And then it lasted even over the invasion, and the real block or the oppression came in 1972 was the cruel year where everything stopped and the border was closed again, and all was gone. And so in those heydays, we had a chance to travel over Europe. We were pretty young, and we played with Chick Corea in Finland. We played with Cannonball Adderley elsewhere, and we played with Bill Dixon in Luxembourg, and so we made a picture. And then I went to stay a year to study in England in 1968. Actually, I came back 2 days before the invasion. So I was just making it in time, to see the Russian tanks rolling in. So that was the influence, you know. So we had a 68 was already the year where the things happened, you know. Seen Jimi Hendrix in London, and I've seen the music go together, you know, the jazz with the rock, you know. I was the Isle of Wight festival, and well, everybody was coming to London, so that was another, you know, source where all the music came to me.
I want to just. I had Martin and I have a colleague, Milan Svoboda, you know, who's also a well-known jazz pianist in the Czech Republic, and I teach in a university program, the NYU Abroad program in Prague, and I invited him to talk to my students, and he brought one album, and this was in fact, this album was Cannonball Adderley, the album that has Mercy Mercy, but he said in the late 1960s, I owned 5 albums. You know what albums are, right? They're the big black things that, yeah, right. And Martin's son was surprised when he said, you can turn it around and it plays on the other side. Okay, so those things. So he had 5 albums, and he said to my students, music majors, he said, these 5 albums taught me more than all the music you can hear on Spotify and iTunes and everything. In other words, there was limited resources, but from those resources, he was able to get everything. Milan Kundera, the great writer, said one banned book in Czechoslovakia has more power than the million books in the Harvard Library. So that's a way to answer the question too.
It goes through my mind that it's nice to add an information that some of the avant-garde American jazz rock or fusion music is influenced or came actually from Europe, you know. Let's take John McLaughlin as an example, you know, my most favorite, beloved guitar player. And Mahavishnu Orchestra is something I can hear, you know, all the way through. And and imitate, I know. Yeah, I'm into this diminished chord, you know. And Joe Zawinul. Joe Zawinul has a mother who comes from Pilsen, and his father, either Vienna or somewhere near, you know, Salzburg maybe. And obviously he went all the way across the ocean and made it here with the music, which you know carries the stamps of counterpoint of European, you know, straight music in a way. And yeah, and when I talk about Joe Zawinul, I'm always adding that I met him in the States in '76, you know, and he had 4 kids with I think 3 different women, and each of the kid had a different shade of skin, you know, from very black to very white, you know. So I mean, this is just a stupid joke. But Joe Zawinul was another idol or another source of music which gave me the way or showed me the way where to go. You know, when I came to study music in '76 to the States, I always wanted, before I wanted to be a black, you know, musician, black Oscar Peterson or whom I was following before, and only here. Michael Gibbs, who was my teacher at Berkeley, just showed me our own world, but from the perspective of, you know, behind the ocean. So I've studied Penderecki with him and Ludoslavsky and all bunch of, you know, actually our music. But he opened the window, you know. One should travel long distances to see his own land and tradition. You know, you only then you learn what is so amazing, you know. And when I went to Berkeley, I felt sort of, you know, I was young and I felt very inferior. So they all can play, it's America, you know. The music is at home, jazz is at home here. I just felt kind of weakish. And they said, huh, this is the guy from the land of Dvorak, you know, who taught us all the music here, you know. So from this onwards, I just grew a little bit up, you know. My arms were, you know, I was given this kind of push, you know. Okay, Tony, it's your turn.
Well, I want to take this to a little bit different direction, and James and Marianne, if I had been able to be on the organizing committee of this conference, I would have organized one session on liberation through music. However, we don't have a session, so we can talk about it right now. In other words, I want to ask you, this is going to be a long question without any answers, but do any of you know the name Joan Baez? You do. We do. We, whose hair is white, knew. But okay, Joan Baez was what they called a folk singer in the early 1960s, and she was associated with Bob Dylan. And in the early 1960s, I was in the Boston area, which was a lots of students, and the folk music revival came through, and people using these folk traditions, but to sing songs of protest and songs of liberation. And Joan Baez sang just a day before I left, last Wednesday, a day before I left for here. She sang at a big venue in Prague on her Fare Thee Well tour. And one of the songs that she sang, she took a Czech, a song that was really sort of the anthem of the resistance to the 1968 invasion, Bratřičku by Karel Kryl. Does that ring a bell to anybody here in the audience? So, and the public was singing along with her, and I realized that music is a way of liberation, and jazz has been a way of liberation. It has been a way of liberation for incredible geniuses from a race that had been really oppressed to come through. And I think that one reason why everybody loved, even in the 20s and 30s, Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, was that they could feel that these people have taken music and made us freer through it. So I want to hear from, we're talking a lot, but does anybody here feel something similar as you're playing jazz or any kind of music? Does anybody want to talk about music as a way of personal liberation? Yeah. Here.
Thank you. I mean, in a lot of ways, within big movements in time, being able to look back at, would say like great wars, big wars or big movements, and politically and stuff like that, we could say that there's also been musical styles that have been developed, or musicians that were very prevalent at that point in time that really influenced a lot of people. Saying this during our period of time, where even the revolution of music is also included, or what it entails is kind of like the digital download age and stuff like that, and just the way that we communicate together as musicians is also changing in a way. And sometimes there's the good and the bad with that. But I'd say even in this, if we're also talking about the political climate, that there's also a lot of liberation in terms of being a jazz musician at this point in time, and in a very unique way, even though there's a lot of people studying and doing what you're doing, whether if they're at Juilliard or just studying at home by themselves, is that we're all starting to be able to be a little bit more connected, and then one of the big ways of being able to do that is the internet and YouTube and stuff like that. And so even though that it may not be as personal as it was before, we're still being able to reach out to each other and in a bigger way. I think we're getting closer to this next liberation of being able to actually come together again, and it's going to be something quite fascinating, I feel. So,
Another.
Thank you.
I have I don't know if it's fortune, it's just where I fell along in the timeline of history. Something that Martin, that you mentioned that I'm curious to get your perspective. I'm of a generation where we had records and also digital downloads. And a lot of the people on the stage, the concept of having their favorite record, my favorite Cannonball Adderley record I have on CD and I've downloaded it, but I'd still rather go home and put it on the turntable and hear the pops, and I can count the pops, and then I know what's going to happen, and then there's one big pop before the sound comes on. What I was taken by was you talked about, this flashpoint in history of '68, how one album could make a difference. Can you talk about how having we have access to anything we want at a phone's fingertip. How not having access to that made your creativity and desire strong?
I'm not quite sure that this is the connection, that the excess of information can like diminish your creativity. But it's true that that once you get hooked to a certain type of music, like I did on John McLaughlin, I mean, I sleep from day to day expecting what next he would want to say, So I mean, I would be glad that they would release a new stuff, because I just seen that he started something, but yet he didn't say the last word, So that was maybe, this is something good on being hooked on one or two rails which you follow, like Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, John McLaughlin. And I had many rails, but even in the world which we are today, where the information is enormous, and you can, by clicking on a knob, get any music, instantly. I think it's just, I think it would ruin, maybe it will not allow this kind of hunger for new stuff to happen, Maybe there must be some, it's not bad idea. But I've got another one. What I think is that, in a way, we are witnessing a sort of fall, or at least a weakening of the classical situation which we have had for the past few years. Like, there is an audience here, and there is a group of genius or less genius musicians here. Well, those are genius, and the audience is clapping hands and is expecting what they will say, This model is brand new. It has not been here before, and I'm very frequent traveler to Himalayas. I'm a climber and spend a lot of time in India, and in those countries, this model is not existing, And I think it started, or it was born in the time of the German classic philosophy, where Schelling would call this guy on the stage das Genium, he would he was not a living man, but das Genium, a thing. And this Genium, the artist, would have a better, straighter, more firm, and higher quality perception of the being, of the universe. And from this arose this situation of the genius being here, or genius, so we call it, and the layman being here. But in the other cultures, like in India, the music is having totally different role. I mean, you've got a raga for the morning. You can get raga when a new infant is born. You can have a raga when somebody dies, and all the day and situation and your life and the moments in your life are structured, and each, to each situation a special music is ascribed. So you walk through India or Himalayas or Nepal, and you hear music all the time, people say, so it's not an artist and the public here, but it's everybody singing, And I want to conclude this weird, thoughts with something which I maybe do not like as the later owner of the label and recording company, that the situation which happens now, that everybody can record his own music, in the garage or anywhere, with the costs of a computer and one mic. Maybe it's returning the situation to this to the pre-German philosophy situation, where the music was an atmosphere, a milieu of the life, So maybe something will be good on it. Everybody says, they steal music. We, as a composer, I'm losing money and everything. So it's all bad things are being mentioned, but this is an optimistic thing.
What's your name? This is what I think, Christian, this is exactly what you were saying, in other words, that the connectivity that you're having through music is bringing it back to belonging to everybody. And exactly like what you're talking about, Schelling talked about it, he theorized it, but music kind of, the whole 19th century ideal of the genius composer, starting with Beethoven going, and then we have our geniuses in jazz, we have our gods, we have Charlie Parker and John Coltrane that we would bow to. However, maybe even if the quality and the incredible mastery of energy that these, quote, geniuses have, maybe it's not so common anymore. What's happened is it's spread out among everybody. And I mean, I'm just blown away that I can come from Prague, Czech Republic, to the middle of Nebraska, or I don't know if this is the middle, but somewhere in Nebraska, and hear a great jazz band. I mean, that's part of what we're talking about. That probably would not have existed if we still just had our vinyl records. You know, you guys probably all got inspired not by your dad playing a vinyl record, or maybe you did, but because of what you heard. So I guess we have to accept the great things that are happening, as well as what we old guys think of as the decadence.
Yeah, I just want to push a little bit these initial thoughts even higher, just to say that the reason why those big thinkers of the German philosophy felt there is something more in the art, you know, which the rational thinking cannot really deliver, that this is what we lucky people in music have, that we've got a medium which has got enormous power, you know. I mean, just much more than explanation and literature and the logos, you know, the Greek, the language, because the music is hitting something which is higher than the ratio in our heads. So Tony asked the question, what is special in music, or so I feel this is it, you know.